CBC reported Canadians making the move down to the United States hit 126,000 in a single year, 10-year high. I'm going to go through the numbers, break this down, that headline, who's making the move, how they're doing it, and then going deeper into the data, because I think they're grossly underestimating the actual number of Canadians that are making the move as well as living in the US. We're going to break down the true number of Canadians that are spending significant time in the US, 3-4 months a year, all the way up to 12 months a year. So stay tuned as I break it down on who these Canadians are, how they're coming to the US, and all the hidden Canadians that are underreported in the mass media. So there's roughly 910,000 Americans living in Canada. And if you look at those born in Canada, Canadian citizens living in the United States, it's a little less than that, 120,000. But you got to look at the data on how big these populations are. US has 335 million people. Canada has about 40 million people. So when you look and control for the population size, 2.2% of Canadians per that data have immigrated to the United States, and just 0.28% of Americans live in Canada. So that's approximately 8-to-10 ratio. But through my research, I'm breaking down that there's visa holders, there's snowbirds, there's remote workers, that this 8-to-10 ratio is actually much, much larger. 10, 15, 20 times the number of Canadians are living in the United States proportionally to the number of Americans living in Canada. I'll do another video of why breaking down the reasons why they're happening. But I think it's good to set the baseline of the true number of Canadians, and not to, believe everything the mass media says. And there actually are a lot more Canadians living in the United States, spending significant time in the United States than the Canadian government or the Canadian media might lead you to believe. So I mentioned that CBC stat, 10-year high, 126,000 Canadians moved down south, but it's missing quite a lot of Americans. Let's go through who these Canadians are that are actually living in the US, moving to the US. And, first you have the permanent residents and citizens, dual nationals, that have made the move to the United States from Canada. And those are just people born in Canada that have a Canadian passport, residing with a green card, or maybe they got the US citizenship as well. There's about 828,000 of them living in the United States. And then you have the TN visa holders. That's another 97,000 visa holders that are across 60 different professional groups, high-skilled professionals, healthcare workers, lawyers, management consultants, statisticians, a lot of different STEM workers able to get the TN visa, economists. So pretty high-skilled labor that has left Canada and is working in the US on the TN visa. So that's about 100,000 people that are living in the United States on the TN visa. And that's not counted in the mainstream media statistics. Adding another layer, you have the E2 investor visa, where there's 7,000, 8,000 of these issued a year to Canadian citizens. And it's a visa for 5 years. So presumably, many of them choose to stay in the United States. And that's, some are being renewed for the E2 visa, but the vast majority, they will transition to some green card categories. So that's a lot of temporary in terms of the statistics, but people that are actually living, working in the US, raising their families in the US. And there could be potentially 40 to 50,000 plus E2 visa holders from Canada residing in the US. Those are the actual investors, as well as some of their key and central employees. And you have other types of non-immigrant visas that are also not counted in the statistics. You have the L1 visa, intercompany transfer. You have the O1 for top talent executives. You add in all these visa categories, H1B, H2B, after adding in all these numbers on the temporary visa holders that are really living in the US, spending 6 months or more a year in the US, and the numbers in the hundreds of thousands. And then what is more of a recent phenomenon I've seen firsthand at my company, Visa Franchise, is a number of Indian-born Canadians that are leveraging their Canadian citizenship and moving to the United States on all different types of visa categories. But there's about 900,000 Indian-born residents in Canada. Over 60,000 of them become Canadian citizens every year. And again, I've seen firsthand, we've had Indian clients that they get the Canadian passport, and 3 months later, they're applying for the E2 visa, or they're at least searching for businesses to invest in to move to the United States. I've had numerous calls and conversations with Indians, Pakistanis that have been living in Canada on either the express entry, where they get the citizenship, I think it was in 3 years, or the normal track of 7 years. And 6 months before they get their Canadian citizenship, they're already planning their move to the United States. They're that serious that they've reached out to us. That means they've probably been thinking about this from early in their days in Canada, and it's been the entry point to move to the US as a bridge with Canada. Then you have the Snowbirds. More than 1 million Canadians spend 3 to 6 months of the year in the United States. And we see this a lot in Florida, Arizona, Texas, the Carolinas. They spend over $8 billion a year annually in the United States. So that's a significant number of Canadian nationals that are living in the United States for a pretty solid portion of the year that is not counted in the statistics. So that's a very one-way relation where you have a ton of Canadians coming to the US, spending prolonged periods of time. You don't have Americans coming up to Canada. I do love visiting Canada. I've been Montreal, Quebec City, Calgary, Toronto. I enjoy the hiking, I enjoy the skiing, but for me personally, 1 week, 2 weeks is sufficient. I don't need to move up to Canada for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months with my family. I'm very happy visiting for a weekend, a couple weeks. It is a beautiful country. However, the weather is quite tough, and another video we'll dig in again to the reasons why Canadians are making the move. But as we like to say in the United States, people vote with their feet. Forget what the people say and anti-American sentiment. There are many Canadians spending significant time in the US, far more than Americans that are doing the inverse. And then a huge bucket are just remote workers, Canadians that are living in Los Angeles, Miami, Austin, even New York. Maybe they have a significant other that's in the United States. Maybe there's some business opportunity, or they just want to spend time in a better weather, warmer weather location. Post 2020, this has really changed. After COVID with remote work, so we've seen a lot of high-skilled Canadian professionals, business owners start spending significant time and leveraging the visa-free travel to the United States, entering on the B1 status. But sadly, a lot of Canadians are abusing the system where you're not supposed to be working remote and continue to be working for your Canadian company on the B1. So that is a topic that we can dive further into on today's video. The real ways that people should be residing in the US and the visas and all that. But there are anywhere from 50,000 to 200,000 plus remote workers, Canadians, that maybe are providing consulting services for RBC or work in tech, have their own small business, and are spending a significant portion of the year in the United States, oftentimes in these sunny locations, or it could be in Chicago, New York, especially those that have significant others living in those cities. So let's break this down. I'm going to reference the data I've collected. Permanent residents, 828,000. TN visa holders, almost 100,000 residing in the United States. E2 visa issuances, I mentioned that a year, 7,000, 8,000. But many of them have continued to live in the US, and you have other visa categories, L1, H2B, all these temporary visa categories, not to mention students of Canadian citizens living in the US on the F1, and the number of temporary visa holders living in the US is well over 200,000. Indian-born Canadian citizens, this is a huge uptick that we've seen, where I guess probably a third of the Canadians I talk to are of Indian origin, of South Asian origin, and they're making the move to the United States. And that third is not included in the statistics because they were not born in Canada. The original number that's always referenced, 820,000, 828,000 Canadians, that's not in the data. There could be another 200,000 of those Indian-born Canadians that have crossed down to the United States, whether on student visas, training visas, E2 visas, all different types of visas. Whatever visa they're on, they're in the United States and they're working or studying, or they're spending at least a significant portion of their time in the U.S., such as the Snowbirds, the final category, over 1 million snowbirds a year. There were reports that a lot of snowbirds aren't coming down. Yes, there were some snowbirds that didn't come down due to Trump and anti-American resentment, but there are still hundreds of thousands, if not at 1 million snowbirds in the US for this winter season. So the popular image of the snowbird is someone that drives their RV and they're going to go to trailer park, for lack of a better word, and spend the winter down in Canada. That's changed a lot over the years. You have many 40, 50, 60-year-olds that have second homes, luxury apartments, luxury houses in Florida, Texas, South Carolina. So there are a lot of very wealthy Canadians that spend a significant portion of their year in the United States. And a big part of what they need to be careful on is not spending more than 182 days in the United States to not be part of the get on the IRS radar and have to essentially pay U.S. taxes on their Canadian source income, or at least be filing for that. So a lot of these snowbirds some are retired, some are pseudo-retired. If they're coming on a visitor status, are they 100% compliant? Depends what they're doing. Some of them are working remote. Some of them are managing employees back home. Probably need to have some other sort of visa that allows them to do that type of work between the two countries. But the data is there. Over 1 million snowbirds spending a significant part of the year in the United States, especially in Florida, Arizona, and those sunshine states. I've personally seen over the last 10 years, there have been a lot of snowbirds that have wanted to spend even more time, and especially that 40 to 50-year-old crowd that still has school-age children, where maybe they were spending 2 months in the US a year, 3 months in the US a year. They're now actually switching it, and they're spending 2 months in Canada, 3 months in Canada, enrolling their children in schools in the United States, and they're opting for different visas, like the E2 essential employee working at a Canadian company, conducting trade between the US and Canada on the E1 visa, L1 setting up a local affiliate, a lot of different temporary visas that these snowbirds can effectively switch over to if they want to spend more time in the US. And there's also green card investor categories like the EB5 for those that have a spare $800,000 sitting around to invest and open up a business or invest in a pooled real estate vehicle. So there are a lot of snowbirds that have decided, hey, 182 days isn't enough for whatever reason, and they've decided to spend more time, as well as some that are spending maybe just 3 months a year, but during those 3 months, they're conducting activities that they need to have a more robust immigration U.S. residency strategy, so they can't just be a visitor on a B1 or a B2 status. The numbers are nuts in terms of the number of Canadians that are coming to the U.S. I mentioned 1 million snowbirds. There's 20.5 million Canadians that go to the U.S. every year, so that's nearly 50% of the total Canadian population, where I'm a big minority. And again, I love Canada. I've been going to Canada since I was 12 years old on ski trips in Quebec. Amazing country, amazing people. But, what percent of Americans are making the trek north? I'd reckon less than 5% of Americans are doing the inverse. It's a very one-way. As we've gone through in today's video, the number of Canadians that are spending significant time down in the United States is very one way. It's the same thing with tourism back up north, or even business trips when you put that in the same frame. I've talked about the TN visa. This is a really underutilized path for professionals that want to move to the United States, especially those in their 20s, 30s, 40s. It's a visa that is processed just at the port of entry. So you don't have to go to the consulate. You don't have to apply through USAS. There's about 60 different professions that are eligible for this NAFTA treaty visa, the TN visa. And you can check out, we'll include a link to those visa categories. But it's issued in 3-year increments. That's a great visa category, especially if you're single, because if you're married, your spouse doesn't get work authorization. They have to figure out their own visa solution. But there's a reason why 97,000 Canadians choose to live in the United States on the TN visa. It's a great initial entry into the US that allows you to fine-tune your craft in the US market to a lot larger audience. The big thing here, though, is you need to have a job offer. So again, early career, maybe you're not ready to take the dive and become a business owner, become an entrepreneur. All you need is a job offer, and it's a very basic application that is done at the a border entry post. They process it on site. So it's a visa that's pretty versatile as long as you have the background in that field. So if you're coming to work in the US, say as a management consultant, you have to have certain credentials that match that. If you're coming to work in the US as an economist, you should have studied economics in university. Same thing if you're coming as a healthcare worker, you should have experience in that field, or at the very least studied in that field. And you can see the criteria of what's really required for each of those roughly 60 occupations. So if you're a Canadian engineer, management consultant, economist, and you have a US job offer, the TN visa is an excellent option for you to realize your American dream and join those other 100 or so thousand other Canadians that are living in the US on the TN visa. And since my time of working with Canadians that are making the move down south, the E2 investor visa category has gone up like crazy. It's not at the 100,000 number of TN visa holders. It's roughly half that of Canadians living in the US on the E2 status. And a big reason is you need to put capital at risk. It's an investor visa. So generally investing $80,000 or more US dollars in a business. And a big benefit of this is your spouse can work. So we see a lot of Canadian dual income earners. One's going to be the business owner, could be in a small business, a franchise business, and the other leaves his, say, software engineering job at a bank in Canada earning 150,000 Canadian and secures a job earning 225,000, 250,000 American dollars for his role and paying significantly less taxes. So it's a great option for those in their 30s, 40s, 50s, say, married with kids, dual income earners. One can be the entrepreneur, kind of a roller coaster ride going up and down. You don't know exactly how every month's going to be in terms of pay, or every quarter is going to be pay. And then your spouse can have a full-time job with the healthcare benefits, health insurance, and more stability that allows you and your family to grow equity in your small family business, or hopefully over time, if you'd like, a big family business. And the spouse can develop his or her career and the largest consumer market, largest enterprise market in the world. So there's a reason why so many Canadian entrepreneurs are moving to the US, business owners are moving to the US. Many of them choose the E2 visa, but there's other categories that Canadians are moving on. As I mentioned earlier in this video, intercompany transfer for the L1, special ability on the O1, H1B, and then also there's a lot of seasonal workers that are coming down. We've had clients in the past on H2B visas, what could be selling solar installation. It could be also on the agricultural side, H2A. So there are thousands of Canadians making the move every year on these temporary visas, and they get unaccounted for when you look at the stats from the mass media. So two of the most popular ways Canadians are working and living in the US, the TN visa, the E2 visa. Now I want to go through the immigration accuracy and how the mass media is not doing their research and not diving in to the true number of Canadians that are making the move to the US every year, as well as the total number of Canadians that are residing in the US. So let's jump right in now. US immigration data is drawn by a country of birth. It doesn't account that we live in a very different world from 1900 to 2026. There are very international families. I've met Canadians that were of South Asian origin, born in Tanzania, lived in Canada 20 years. South Africans born in South Africa, moved to Canada. We've had a lot of different immigrants that have made the move south to the US. Probably represents a third, maybe half of our Canadian clients are immigrants, or at least the children of immigrants. So the official data say if you were born in India and you're a software engineer and you obtain the EB2 green card or EB1A green card and you become a US permanent resident, you're treated as an Indian. You're not treated as a Canadian, even though you have dual citizenship in Canada, you lived there for 14, 15 years, you're treated as an Indian in the eyes of the American government. And for me, Canada is losing a lot of their high-skilled professionals, technology workers, healthcare workers. Many of them are moving to the United States and they're not coming back. So they've been able to successfully, for lack of a better word, attract, recruit high-skilled labor from South Asia, many parts of Europe, Africa, and they're not staying in Canada. Many of them are making the move to the United States in a much higher percentage when you compare the low-skilled workers who are staying in Canada at a much higher percentage. So high-skilled, many of them are moving to the US, and Canada is left with the low-skilled laborers that are staying there in Canada. They're not moving on. They're happy with the social contract you have in terms of free healthcare and a lot of the benefits, unemployment benefits, where the US system is much more individualistic, relying on your family, extended family for support when you're in tough times. And you got to really manage your situation. So it is attractive for those high-skilled immigrants that are making the move, and they use Canada as kind of a launch pad into the North American market, leaving India, leaving Pakistan, even leaving Europe, and those are unaccounted for. So you have the folks that are using their Canadian passport, getting a temporary visa. We have that data, TN issuances, E2 visa issuances, all these Canadians working, studying in the US with Canadian passports, no matter where they were born in the world. We have that data. What's missing, and we have to do like a freedom of information request with the US government, are those dual national Canadians, or maybe they just have a Canadian passport. They gave up their Indian passport, but as they were born in India, they're treated as an Indian for US immigration purposes. Does it make sense? Does it make it difficult to understand the true number of Canadian citizens moving to the US? Yeah, for me, it doesn't make much sense, and there should be some reform or at least clarification in the data. So when you start with the 828,000 permanent residents, you add the 100,000 TN holders, The E2s, another 50,000. Then you add the other categories I mentioned: L1, H2B, H1, H1B, F1, J1. That adds another 500,000 plus to the number. So it's now at say 1.3 million Canadians living in the U.S. But you have to also add in those snowbirds. They're spending serious time in the United States, contributing to the U.S. economy, spending money. Sales taxes are being paid. Those taxes are not received in Canada. So they're spending a lot of money, billions of dollars in tax revenue, $6 billion plus in tax revenue received by the U.S. government from these snowbirds that could have been going to the Canadian coffers, but it's coming to the U.S. So when Canadians complain to us, and I see it when we're running LinkedIn ads and LinkedIn posts and saying, read the room, no one's leaving Canada, and usually it's like people that are like 4th or 5th generation Canadian or even 8th generation Canadian, and they haven't spent much time in the US, and they're probably not interacting even too much with our clients that are pretty global, multicultural, and are making the move. But when I see those comments, it's I just want to say, hey, it's just the facts, it's the data. I'm not saying you might live in an amazing town in Canada, your family's there, you prioritize family, great. I applaud that. There are many people, though, Canadian nationals that don't have family. They moved from India, Pakistan, or their families on the west coast of Canada, and they live in Toronto. So they don't have that. They don't have a sense of community. There's a lot of different reasons why people are moving down south. I'll do a separate video. We're going to do another video on that. But before you hate on us, before you hate on your fellow Canadian citizens that are making the move down south, understand that there are millions of Canadians living in the US, and every year, much more than 125,000 Canadians that are making the move to the United States, as well as over 1 million Canadians that spend a significant portion of the year in the US as snowbirds on a B1 status, B2 status that the statistics don't document for. So, the ratio, the proportion of Americans spending time or say Canadians spending time in the US, Americans spending time in Canada, 8-1 just using the mainstream media. But I would argue that it's more like 20-1 in terms of the number of Canadians that are spending significant time in the United States as the number of Americans spending significant time in the US. When you add in the students, the workers, the retirees, it's really a one-way flow north to south. And I'm in the minority of, less than 5% of Americans that cross the northern border. Again, I really like Canada. I haven't met nicer people in the world, maybe besides for the Philippines. But I do love Canadians. I love the mix of languages, and Quebec French, much of the rest of the country speaking English. Amazing geography, hiking, skiing. It's really world class. But the trend is there. And you can, fight and you can complain about the people that are making the move from Canada to the United States. But the trend is there. And the fact is that Canada is losing a lot of really skilled people, whether they were born in Canada or they acquired Canadian citizenship through different programs like family unification or through skilled immigration. Canada is losing hundreds of thousands of Canadians a year to the United States. The data is underreported, and I think it's probably going to come out in 5-10 years when it starts to really hit the tax income that the Canada is earning. I can think of one former Canadian snowbird that was based in Quebec, earning roughly 300,000 Canadian. And when he broke it down to me in terms of the numbers and his motivation, he already he loved Florida, spending 3 months, 4 months a year in Florida. But just from the tax perspective, after you add in the value added tax, the income tax, it was your sales tax on consumption, 50 to 60% in taxes. And when he did the calculation for Florida, it was more as a married couple earning that amount. The projected spendings, half that, even less, 25%. So the tax savings is significant, but that's enough of the reasons. I wanted to break down just the true data. I'm going to do another video on the most popular reasons why Canadians are moving to the US, and why the situation's only going to get worse for the Canadian government or get better for Americans as we gain from these amazing Canadian professionals, entrepreneurs, investors making the move south. And I'll dive into those reasons why they're moving to the United States in another video. But I hope you like this breakdown of just the crazy proportion of Canadians in the US, and it's accelerating. So the total number is well over 2 million Canadians in the United States, and that's growing year over year, despite what the mainstream media might be telling you back home in Canada. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Subscribe to my channel where I produce content on US business, immigration trends. Leave in the comment section, if I'm missing any other pools of Canadians, hidden Canadians making the move to the US. And again, the next video will be on the reasons these Canadians are making the move. Hope you enjoyed it.